Hi.
How's it going? All right, so we are doing a short video today. This one is going to be going over some commonly used, maybe uncommonly used terminology in the bodybuilding arena. Today we're going to be talking about a few terms that you might see pop up on training programs.
Like concentric, eccentric, isometric contraction, and isometric stretch. What I like to just call contraction and stretch.
All right, so what do these terms mean? So let's start with the first one. Depends on.
So the one that everyone seems to focus on is the concentric phase, because that's the actual lifting of the weights, which is exerting force against the object, pushing it away from you if it's a push move, pulling it into you if it's a pull move. So to use a biceps as an example, to raise the dumbbell, that's the concentric phase, the actual motion of it. Everyone focuses on this phase to the exclusion of the three other phases in most cases. And that phase is important for strength, not necessarily size.
So for size, what are we interested in?
The eccentric phase, or lowering of the weight. So you often see, I shouldn't say often see, but something I've dealt with in my life is people who will do a deadlift. They'll explode up and then they will drop the weight.
We see a lot of that at the gym.
Which is great if you're a competitive powerlifter and you actually compete in powerlifting. But it's the reason why they do that is multifold. One of the things about powerlifting is they don't want to gain muscle. They want to stay in their weight class. So they want to develop strength relative to their body weight in a lot of cases.
So we're interested in hypertrophy.
Correct.
So the eccentric movement is important to us.
So the contrary, so the good example is with bodybuilding, they typically do Romanian deadlifts where you lower the weight, pause, and then come back up with the weight, keeping constant tension on the muscle, rather than just doing singles with a concentric phase and no eccentric phase.
All right, so we have concentric, eccentric, and
so there's the isometric contraction and isometric stretch, which we're just going to call contraction and stretch. So in the case of the bicep, so you concentric, explode up as fast as you can for strength, and then you squeeze at the top for about a second. That's what I like to do. Some people say that there is no value to this. I think there is value to this. And then you lower it typically 2 or 3 times slower than you came up with it.
And that's the eccentric phase.
And then in this example of a bicep movement, there is not really a stretch phase, because when your arm's hanging straight down, it's not working against gravity any longer. But in some movements, there is actually a stretch component. Like for instance, in the Romanian deadlifts, at the bottom of the lift would be a stretch phase where you pause for a second. There's controversy as to whether this builds muscle or not. What I think it helps with is it lets you, instead of using tendons and connective tissue as a rubber band and slingshotting out of the hole, that what it does is it allows you to, if the force stays on the muscle itself, you can usually feel whichever muscle is most stretched, and that's the muscle that'll contract first when you initiate the next concentric phase. An example of this is squatting. A lot of powerlifters bounce out of the hole and they use the connective tissue as a slingshot so they can handle more weight, because the bottom of the squat is the hardest part of the squat. Whereas what I like to do is pause for a full second or two at the bottom of the squat and actually transfer the force to my quads and my glutes as best as I can before I initiate the motion with driving my hips forward.
So the purpose of this video isn't to give you a recommendation on tempo, just because that's going to vary based on the movement, the type of movement it is, whether it's a stretch movement, a contractional movement, or a contraction movement, the program block that you're in, whatever. That's not the point of this. The point is to just give you an idea of when you hear the terms concentric, eccentric, contraction, these terms, what they mean. So you want to give another example? How about a tricep extension?
Okay, so for tricep, extensions when your arm is at your side, contraction, squeeze, come up slow. Look at this. Come up slow.
And
that's the eccentric phase. And then you can pause in the stretch position if you want. And then contraction I'm a concentric phase, contraction, eccentric, stretch. Now, like she was saying, is tempo. There's not really a whole lot of value to stretching in this. Now, if the arm was over your head and we're actually stretching the long head of the tricep.
So if we're doing like sword pulls or...
Yeah, the rope, then that's when pausing in the stretch position would make more sense, because it's a stretch focused move. So the stretch phase of the lift is most relevant.
Awesome. So bodybuilding terminology explained. Yeah.